Dark Souls is a series of games that I weren't interested in for the longest time. Due to their infamous level of difficulty, I didn't want to put myself through that experience since I'm not the best at video games. But the more I watched videos and learned about these games, the more interested I became in actually playing them. So I got the Dark Souls trilogy for Xbox One, and have recently finished Dark Souls Remastered for the first time. And while it does have some frustrating issues that I will be talking about, what I got was one of the most rewarding video game experiences I've ever had. One that I would easily put up there with my favorite games. And I'm going to be talking about why in this video. The setting of Dark Souls is incredible. There are so many locations that are visually amazing and have great atmosphere. It gives almost every area its own unique feeling that makes this entire journey so memorable. My favorite location would easily be Firelink Shrine. In a game that is overall very stressful, Firelink Shrine is the only place in the game that really feels safe. After finally finishing a difficult area, returning to Firelink always feels like such a relief. It also has plenty of hidden secrets and connections to other areas that make it extremely impressive in terms of level design. I also really loved Anor Londo as a location. To go from the decay and grit of previous areas to this beautiful city was such a surreal feeling. I also like the contrast of how nice the city looks while also being one of the most dangerous areas so far. Really my only issue with it were those archers that snipe you from a massive distance, and the Ornstein and Smaug fight making me more angry than any boss up until that point. For these reasons, I wouldn't quite say it's my favorite location, but it's definitely up there. Also, I love the way that gameplay ties into the world design. Due to the difficulty of the game, it's very easy to die and get sent back to the last bonfire if you're not prepared. It can create a lot of frustration and tedium, but it also makes every bit of progress so satisfying. Whether it's finally figuring out how to kill that one enemy, finding a shortcut to an earlier area, or just reaching a bonfire after dying so many times to get there. I have yet to see a game that makes progression this satisfying. But despite how satisfying exploration can feel most of the time, Dark Souls has plenty of areas that just feel punishing for the sake of it. The game up until Anor Londo is pretty consistent in terms of good areas, but it also has Sen's Fortress, which besides being one of the most annoying areas in terms of gameplay, just doesn't look interesting visually. Besides the nice view you get when you finally get to the top, it isn't very well lit and it's just dull to look at. Once you finish Anor Londo, the areas in the latter half of the game, despite being great in terms of visuals and atmosphere, are some of my least favorite in terms of gameplay. Although New Londo Ruins has a really good boss fight with the Four Kings, the area having no bonfires made it extremely frustrating to make my way back every time. Even the shortcut you get after draining the lake still takes really long. It's also extremely frustrating that they made transient curses such a limited resource when they're the only effective way to fight all the ghosts you come across. The Demon Ruins and Lost Izalith were probably the worst areas. Not only recycling multiple enemies from earlier in the game, but having some of my least favorite bosses. The worst one easily being the Bed of Chaos. It's a terrible fight that's based around this game's incredibly clunky platforming. And it's also a boss that takes way too long to return to after death. The Catacombs have great atmosphere, but if you have a divine weapon, they are extremely easy to finish. The Tomb of Giants was pretty frustrating, but became more manageable when I got to the first bonfire. Although I really don't like the fact that they made this area so dark if you don't have one of 3 specific methods of illumination. It just seems really unfair to me. This wasn't personally an issue since I had a sunlight maggot, but it just seems like bad game design to punish players for no reason like this. The Duke's Archives, on the other hand, is one of my favorite areas of the game, not only because of its great visuals and atmosphere, but I felt it had a good balance of being difficult but still pretty fun. It's strange that they chose to make a boss that you're supposed to get killed by to progress, but that's really the only part that I didn't like. But the Crystal Caverns right after is one of my least favorite areas of the game, solely because of its boss. The area itself is fine, it looks beautiful, and the enemies aren't too difficult. But the boss fight with Seath the Scaleless was one of the most frustrating of the game for me. Not only because it's a very hard fight that's very easy to get killed on, but the run back to the boss fight every time you die was brutal. Crystal Caverns has no bonfires until you beat Seath, meaning that you'll have to take a few minutes just to make it back to the boss. Although Dark Souls' difficulty is pretty fair for the most part, it's areas like this where Dark Souls lives up to its reputation of just being difficult for the sake of it. I tried to look up a guide as little as possible, since part of the fun of this game is overcoming challenges for yourself, but with some of these areas, I lost my patience very quickly. Although I like the combat of Dark Souls, I feel a bit mixed when it comes to the boss fights. I feel that most of the boss fights in this game are challenging but still fair. But similar to the game's areas, some of these fights just feel punishing for the sake of it. There's examples of the game just cheaply killing you, such as the Capra Demon, that's not only in a very small area with 2 other enemies, barely gives you any time to react after entering. It feels like the game is just punishing you for the sake of it rather than making a genuine challenge. This is even more of an issue in the latter half. As I've mentioned in the last section, there are some bosses like Bed of Chaos or Seath the Scaleless, which besides being infuriating to fight, also takes so long to get back to due to there being no nearby bonfires. It makes these already frustrating bosses even more annoying. But in general, the boss fights are pretty good. They're very hard and overwhelming at first, but the feeling of gradually learning more about their attack patterns and beating them is really satisfying. And if you ever get stuck on a certain boss, you almost always summon NPCs or other players to help you out. This is where I'm going to start talking about spoilers for the game. So if you haven't played it yet and don't want to get spoiled, I'd recommend clicking off. Once I offered all 4 Lord Souls to the Lord Vessel, the massive door behind it finally opened, revealing the final area of the game. There may not be that much to do in the Kiln of the First Flame other than fight a few knights, but in terms of visuals, it's one of my favorite locations of the game. It has a really bleak atmosphere while also being kind of beautiful at the same time. Then there's the fight with Gwyn, which I hear many people call easy due to him being a boss you can parry, but as someone who has never parried up until this fight, it took me hours to beat him. It was extremely frustrating, even more so with the massive distance between the Lord Vessel and Gwyn every time I died. But when I finally got the timing right and beat him in a few hits, it was genuinely one of the most cathartic moments of the game for me. Dark Souls' storytelling is extremely vague, only giving you bits of information through occasional NPC interactions or item descriptions. I didn't fully understand the plot of the game, but still found it very interesting to learn all these little facts. But at least to me, it felt that the atmosphere of the game and what it makes you feel are more important than actually understanding the plot. It more feels like a game that's meant to evoke emotions out of the player rather than tell a proper story. But there's one part of the plot that I did find very interesting, that being the final moment of the game. I can't say with confidence that I understood what that final choice meant, but the impression that I got is that it's between sacrificing yourself and maintaining the depressing state of the world, or to walk away and bring the world into a new age, but one that could be much worse. It's a bleak choice for a bleak story. Might make it seem as if everything that happened was meaningless. But despite the terrible things that happen in Dark Souls, I think its main message is one of hope. The game takes place in a truly terrible world where almost everything is trying to kill you. It creates a feeling of hopelessness that really the entire game revolves around, including your main character. The whole idea of your character is that the only thing that prevents you from going hollow and losing your sanity is your perseverance. That regardless of how many times you struggle or how many times you lose, you will always get back up and try again. It's a game that above all is about never giving up in the face of great challenge and hardship. It's a really beautiful message that I feel gives the story a lot more meaning than just being depressing. It's one of those messages that can work very well in other mediums, but expressing it in the form of a video game gave it a level of emotional weight that few stories have made me feel. Dark Souls is at times one of the most frustrating game experiences that I've ever had, yet I could not stop playing it. It feels like it's been so long since I've been this excited to just play a game, where even when I'm not playing it, it's all I can think about. There's a lot of stupid things in Dark Souls, and I found it such an addictive experience with a really powerful message at its core. It has completely convinced me to play the other Souls games. And even if I don't love them as much as this one, I hope that they reach anywhere near the level of enjoyment I had playing Dark Souls 1. Thanks for watching my first video game review. I really liked writing this one and have many more planned in the future, so subscribe if you'd like to see more from me and let you know how you thought about this video in the comments. Anyways, that's about it. Thanks for watching.